Hannah Miller smiled as the police arrived, her trembling hands hiding a secret darker than grief. Daniel Miller lay dead in his car, the scene crafted with chilling precision, a perfect illusion of despair. Detective Sarah Blake saw through the tears, sensing the calm calculation behind Hannah's every word. What looked like tragedy was a performance, and the lead actress had rehearsed her lines well. But beneath Hannah's flawless act, one mistake was waiting to expose everything she thought she'd buried. Hannah Miller had the kind of life that looked picture-perfect from the outside. Her neighbors saw her tending to her rose garden every morning, waving 2 children on their way to school, and chatting kindly with everyone she met. Her husband, Daniel, seemed equally content, a quiet accountant who preferred books over parties and routine over surprises. Together, they looked like a couple who had it all: stability, comfort, and mutual respect. But beneath the warm smiles and polite gestures, Hannah's world was slowly coming undone. She had grown tired of Daniel's predictability, of a life that never changed, and of a husband who no longer looked at her the way he once did. Behind closed doors, their marriage was crumbling in silence. Daniel had begun to notice strange things: money missing from their joint account, unfamiliar perfume on Hannah's clothes, and messages on her phone that she quickly deleted. He asked questions, but Hannah always had explanations that sounded just believable enough. What he didn't know was that she had been seeing someone else, a man who promised excitement, travel, and a way out. But to get that life, Hannah needed freedom and money, and Daniel's death would give her both. It started as a thought, a passing fantasy she brushed off at first. Then it became a plan, careful and calculated. For weeks, Hannah prepared. She learned the basics of how suicide investigations worked, watched crime documentaries, and even searched online for how to stage a believable scene. She began acting more affectionate toward Daniel, making his favorite meals and leaving little notes of love around the house. He was confused by her sudden tenderness, but he didn't question it. She wanted it that way. Every move she made was designed to paint the image of a loving wife, devastated by her husband's supposed depression. The night it happened, the streets of Maple Creek were unusually quiet. Hannah waited until Daniel had gone to bed before she slipped something into his drink, a sedative she'd bought online under another name. When he was asleep, she drove his car to a remote area just outside town, placed a gun beside him, and left a forged note in his pocket. Then she walked away, calm and steady, believing she had created the perfect lie. By sunrise, she was back home, brewing coffee, rehearsing tears, and waiting for someone to call with the terrible news. The news of Daniel Miller's death spread quickly through Maple Creek, leaving neighbors in quiet disbelief. To everyone, it seemed unthinkable that a man so steady, so gentle, would take his own life. Hannah played her part with flawless precision. She answered the detective's questions with a trembling voice, her eyes red from what appeared to be a sleepless night. She told them Daniel had been under enormous stress at work, that he'd been withdrawn lately, and that she had tried everything to help him. Her words carried just the right mix of sorrow and confusion. Detective Sarah Blake, however, wasn't convinced. Something about Hannah's grief felt too perfect, too controlled, as if every tear had been placed exactly where it needed to be. When detectives examined Daniel's car, the details didn't sit right. The weapon was positioned neatly beside him, not fallen or dropped. His wallet and keys were placed on the dashboard in a way that seemed deliberate. Even the note found in his pocket looked suspiciously clean, printed on high-quality paper with no smudges or fingerprints. Sarah and her partner, Tom Ruiz, exchanged glances. They had both seen genuine suicides before, and they rarely looked this tidy. The scene told a story, but it was one written by someone who didn't understand the messages of real despair. At the morgue, the autopsy brought more questions. The medical examiner noted that Daniel's blood contained traces of an unfamiliar sedative. It wasn't enough to kill him, but just enough to make him compliant. That discovery shifted everything. Detectives began to look closer at Hannah, quietly checking her background, her recent purchases, and her online searches. Meanwhile, Hannah played the grieving widow flawlessly in public, accepting casseroles, thanking friends for their condolences, and speaking softly about her husband's secret sadness. Detective Sarah visited Hannah's home again, asking casual questions about Daniel's routine and their final evening together. Hannah repeated her story without hesitation, but when Sarah checked the neighbor's security footage later that day, she noticed a gap. Daniel's car had left the driveway 2 hours later than Hannah claimed. It was a small inconsistency, but it changed everything. Sarah didn't confront her immediately. Instead, she quietly started building a case. Beneath Hannah's calm exterior, Sarah could sense something dangerous, a mind that believed it had already won. But Sarah had seen this kind of confidence before, and she knew it always cracked under pressure. Detectives Sarah Blake and Tom Ruiz began digging deeper into the life Hannah and Daniel shared, and the perfect picture she had painted began to fade. They learned that Hannah had recently opened a secret bank account, transferring small amounts of money over several months. Credit card statements showed purchases that had nothing to do with Daniel's life: expensive clothes, hotel stays, and dinners for two. When questioned about them, Hannah explained they were business expenses for her charity work, an excuse that sounded rehearsed but couldn't be immediately disproven. Sarah filed it away, knowing the truth would surface soon enough. The forensic team's report came in days later and confirmed the detectives' growing suspicions. Although Daniel's fingerprints were on the gun, there was no trace of gunpowder on his hands or clothing. That meant he hadn't fired it. The suicide note, printed on clean paper, matched the font style from Hannah's home printer. Even more troubling, the note's wording seemed oddly detached, lacking any emotion or personal touch. It read like something copied from the internet. When Tom ran a digital scan, he found fragments of the same sentences online, taken from various suicide letter examples. Someone had pieced them together, and that someone lived with Daniel. Meanwhile, a toxicology report revealed that Daniel's bloodstream contained traces of a rare substance. It was available only through overseas websites, and Sarah knew she had seen that detail somewhere before. When the tech team examined Hannah's laptop, they found deleted browsing history and several visits to obscure online pharmacies. There were also searches that chilled even experienced investigators. How to make suicide look real. How to stage a crime scene. Can bleach remove fingerprints? Still, Hannah stayed calm whenever they visited. She offered coffee, smiled through fake sadness, and spoke about Daniel as if she were narrating a movie about her own tragedy. Her answers never wavered, but her eyes gave her away sharp, calculating, always assessing what they knew and what they didn't. Sarah could sense her arrogance growing. Hannah thought she had explained every detail perfectly, that her performance of grief was convincing enough to close the case. But the detectives weren't fooled. Every lie Hannah told fit together too neatly. Every story was too precise. It was only a matter of time before her confidence became the very thing that trapped her. Detectives Sarah Blake and Tom Ruiz knew they were close, but they needed proof that would hold up in court. Hannah was clever, cautious, and always one step ahead when it came to appearances. They decided to use that against her. Instead of pressing her harder, they softened their approach. At their next visit, they told her that after weeks of investigation, the evidence pointed toward suicide. Hannah's face soft in a way Sarah hadn't seen before, not with grief, but with relief. She nodded slowly, pretending to be heartbroken, but the faintest hint of a smile flickered across her lips. The detectives left her house that day, knowing their trap was working. A few days later, Sarah made sure a local newspaper ran a small story about the case, mentioning that new forensic technology could detect microtraces of gunpowder and cleaning chemicals inside cars. Even after multiple washes, it was a subtle line, easy to miss, but it was exactly what they needed. That same night, a security guard at the police impound lot noticed a familiar car pulling up near midnight. A woman stepped out, dressed in dark clothes, her face hidden beneath a hood. She moved quickly toward one of the vehicles, Daniel Miller's sedan. Cameras caught her unlocking the door, slipping inside, and wiping every surface she could reach with cleaning wipes. What Hannah didn't know was that the detectives had anticipated this. The car had been moved to a monitored section, and every second of her visit was recorded. By the time she left, confident she had erased whatever evidence might have remained, Sarah and Tom were already watching the footage from their office. Hannah had done exactly what they hoped. She would prove her own guilt with her actions. The next morning, Sarah ordered a new forensic sweep of the car. The results were undeniable. The cleaning solution Hannah used left traces of her DNA on the steering wheel and door handles. Inside the trunk, technicians found faint chemical residues consistent with the same sedative found in Daniel's blood. It was the final piece they needed. Hannah had thought she was erasing the truth, but instead, she had written her confession in bleach. When Hannah Miller was arrested, she didn't panic. She stood in her doorway in her neatly pressed blouse, her expression calm, almost annoyed, as if the detectives had interrupted her morning routine. She insisted it was a misunderstanding and walked into the interrogation room with steady steps, her hands clasped neatly in front of her. For hours, she maintained her story. Daniel had been distant. She had tried to help, and she didn't understand why anyone would think she was involved. But the detectives said very little. They didn't need her confession. They already had the truth captured in video, data, and evidence that could not be argued away. When they finally showed her the surveillance footage of her breaking into the impound lot, her confidence faltered for the first time. Still, she didn't speak. She stared at the screen, her face pale but controlled. Even then, she tried to find a way out. She claimed she had gone to the car because she needed closure, that she wanted to sit in the same seat where her husband had died. But when they presented the lab results, the traces of cleaning chemicals, her DNA on the steering wheel, and the residue matching the drug found in Daniel's system, Hannah had no explanations left. The silence in the room became her final answer. The trial that followed captivated Maple Creek. People who once admired Hannah sat in disbelief as prosecutors laid out the story of her deception. They showed how she had forged the note, staged the scene, and even pretended to be a grieving widow for sympathy. The jury didn't take long. After less than 2 hours, they returned with a guilty verdict for first-degree murder. Hannah's expression barely changed as the sentence was read life without parole. She simply adjusted her posture, straightened her shoulders, and looked straight ahead, refusing to show regret. In the months that followed, Maple Creek moved on, but the story lingered. Neighbors who once waved at Hannah from their lawns spoke of how evil could wear a polite smile. The house where she once baked cookies for the block stood empty, the garden overgrown. Detective Sarah Blake never forgot the case. She often said it wasn't the evidence that convicted Hannah, it was her own pride. The wife who thought she could outsmart everyone had become the author of her own downfall.